Hi, I'm Aasma, and I'm going to be moderating this panel, Artistic Practices, Sites and Infrastructures. And joining me today are Jasmine, Nilani, Joseph, who is speaking from Jaffna, Natasha, Jozi from Islamabad, Maksud Ali Mondal from Goa, and but he's actually based in Shantiniketan. He's currently in Goa doing a residency. And Mohit Shelare, who is based in Amravati but is currently speaking from Mumbai. Some of us know each other from before. Some of us have heard of each other. And some we've really got to know for the first time through this panel. All of us have quite diverse practices with varying dispositions towards our work and its relationship with the art ecosystem. But something that didn't take long for us to share and really commonly agree upon was that rather than entering with what sites mean to us, as was proposed in the invitation by Ishara, we take a step back into what kinds of situations move us to engage with sites in the first place. And how do we share and activate conversations about this engagement through the work that gets produced? So for Maksud, for example, it is about creating microbial environments and eating mushroom soup together. While Jasmine draws perspectives of belonging from landscapes that she's constantly traversing through. For both Natasha and Mohit, the engagement is specifically with the body. With Mohit, it is to do with the way that the body gets measured and documented within sites. For Natasha, it is about how the body performs in rehearsed and unrehearsed situations. And with me, it is through situations that are embedded in technical activities of communication. So in our conversations, we've been kind of reflecting on situations that produce questions around accessibility, mobility, scale, comfort, anxieties, and insecurities that manifest within infrastructures. And we'd really like to push these ideas further today through today's conversation, especially from the context of what art infrastructures provide, what they enable, but also what they disable. In another sense, how their conditions affect artistic practices in terms of planning, sourcing, making, storing, discarding, and so on. So in terms of the form, we will be starting with a series of brief presentations of the works of each speaker, and just for everyone to get acquainted with their practices. And then we will try to then develop a conversation amongst ourselves before addressing questions from the audience. So you can put your questions down in the Q&A box anytime. Yeah, and with that, I'd like to hand it over to Maksud.
Thank you, Aasma and Savi, for this symposium and togetherness in the symposium. Let me share my screen. So hi. So when site basically is coming into the discourse, like what site does mean actually, and what sites, like when it's coming for site or specific location, what does that mean to us, and has so I think site has its own voice to say something or to provide something when we enter into the certain space that is like when we enter into the space that is existing something phenomena or something that identity that is carried. So that is not a static, but something when we are entering to the space that we look at the possibility of the site sometimes. So this is Fungal Garden. Fungal Garden is a project that result from the research done from underground termite colony. where they grow fungi as a food for survival. So this is an ecosystem that I generated in a human conditioned garden to create the dialogue on how we understand ourselves in relation to each other, including other species, organisms, and civilization, as well as our place in the transforming environment. So this is basically a inside structure of the ecosystem that I created, and created a condition where spores basically that is in the air, and the species that can germinate or attracted by this space. So even when we as viewer or sometimes as an observer that we are entering to this space, how our spores are, we carry it basically in the spores through our bodies. And when we are entering to this space, that space becoming a contamination zone of various organisms. So this is the space that we are, this is like a maze-like structure, so people can enter and experience this kind of germination of several, growth and the process. So this is a moisture conditioned space, and these are the this is whole natural phenomena and non-human interactions are happening beyond the human visibility, and these microscopic images are found into the biosystem. So bringing these non-human agencies into the conversation, a site is emerging that is not a static moment. So static moment of the history, identity or politics, it's keep transforming by the time. So when we enter to the discourse and creates the dialogue within the site, is transformed in another way of, or another definition of a site. So this is the, this is the microbial infection or contamination that is happening all over this space or in the ecosystem. And the network also, and several species that is coming and germinating over the space. And this is the another interaction. There were a walkthrough into the fungal garden, and offered mushroom soup to have a conversation. So conversation started when we entered to the ecosystem, and when we are entering to the space, we are inhaling of so many spores in our body. So body becoming is like a contaminated. Or when we consume mushroom soup, so mushroom soup that is coming from the mushroom that produced from the restriction of any contamination. So this is creating a dialogue or dialogue between this, which is the contamination of the space, contamination of our body, contamination of the species. So the idea of purity and impurity lead to this conversation also about the monoculture or existential crisis in the globe. So this space become an interaction between bacteria, fungi, creature, and human for investigating of symbiotic process through embodied shared experiences. And this is another project, Nature Unconditioned, and what actually does mean abandoned or ruin or a dam space or warehouse as a site. So this is also something, the space that I created in a condition, in a sort or response to the condition, and a space entirely dedicated to reading the architecture basically. So the space is constantly mutating with the free growth of nature. And this abandoned space was once used, but in times it was abandoned. So these are the collections that I found in the site after the investigation of the site, such as like there were mosses, mycelium, decaying objects, and piece of damp wall or soil, and a herbarium of the plants those were growing on the wall. So these were shared in the installation as a process of engaging or process of interaction or process of a research that developed before I entering to the space. So these are the Petri dishes that I collected those material and kept into the Petri dishes, so that the process itself can continue and we can experience the whole phenomena that is that provoked me to engage with the site. So this also the engagement of the site as an observer or emulating scientific experiment to introduce phenomenology as a situation, and nurturing and growing several kind of fungi, so that so the architecture of this space basically become like a situation for experiencing with our body itself, so that it's not like something we are perceiving through the distance, but our body is becoming itself into this space of our contamination space. So this is also about how non-human agencies are, becoming part of this conversation or reading to the side. So this is also about how anthropocentrism is at the root of the ecological crisis currently. I think, so this is the discourse in the whole situation that is created here. Yeah. So. Thank you.
Jasmine, would you like to go next? Jasmine, you're on.
Yeah. So before I jump into the slides, I really want to thank Sabi Ahmed, Ishara Art Foundation, India Art Fair, and the Shiv Nadar University, and all of my friends who hang with me. As an artist, site means the places which I stay and the spaces I create the works and exhibit. Here you see the map of.
Sorry, Jasmine. Could you maximize, make the presentation full screen so we can see the details a little better?
Okay. Is it okay?
If you can share it as a slideshow, then it will maximize.
Yeah. I hope it works now, right?
We can see your desktop now. It's okay if it's not if it's not work. Yeah. Now it's working. Got it.
Yeah. So as an artist, site means the places which I stay and the spaces which I create the works and exhibit. Here you see the map of my country and the places mentioned here, the locations I stay and hostel over the past 10 years. Jaffna, where I born, and it is the place of my ancestors, my childhood memories, the place of learning and practice. Paunia, where I displaced in 1995, built a new shelter, and which is my home and family. Colombo is the place which I depend on for visit art festivals, museums, art galleries, and the place to collect art materials. I believe that I learn more when I travel within these places, but as an artist who works in the studio, I disappointing with these temporary studio spaces. Being a practicing artist without any other permanent jobs in Jaffna is an alienated thing. If any single lady rent a room in Jaffna, she needs a job which is comfortable to the house owner and the society. If not, it is struggle to let them to understand about the reason of our stay. Hence, I must prepare myself to shift to a new studio space often. And the amount of the rent is also measured by the size of packages, portfolios, and the bundle of art materials I carry with me, which led me to limit the capacity of materials I use. Address of Residence is the series about my struggle to choosing a permanent residence. I give the same priorities both of my family and the art world. Hence, they made me to shuttle between places. Sometimes they create major tensions to take decisions. I confuse to give a proper address when people require the postal address of mine to send letters and catalogs or even for applying art initiatives. Here in these drawings, you can see the figures in the horizontal way reflects the landscape of Jaffna and Vaunia. The houses in different perspective are the actual sites of Vaunia, and the abandoned buildings and fences are the sites in Jaffna we lost in the past. I exhibit these works in the University of Jaffna and Gallery Espas in New Delhi. Some of these works published in Brick magazine and the vitamin D3 of Payden's books. Here, the publications take the role of site of display. And, when they're publishing these kind of works, the publications became the site of exhibition. That's what I realized. The creating process of mobile studio series started with a kind of depression in terms of the measurement and the space of the studio. I like to welcome the curators, journalists, and artist friends who come from far to visit to my studio. But personally, I feel guilty about the low facilities of the temporary studio space, which is also my rented room, not only a studio. In 2020, I did the artist residency in Pepper House, organized by Kochi Benali Foundation. When I returned to Sri Lanka in March, the world freezed by the pandemic. I was unable to get my studio back in Jaffna. Hence, I stayed home in Vaunia. I could to set a limited space as my studio, which created sort of fear about my career in terms of getting materials and transfer the works to cities and shipment out of the country. Also, I realized that my studio is not a fixed one. It's flexible and mobile. In these drawings, I used a kind of imagined and created forms of sites. Those are in my memory and where I lived in the past 3 decades of my life. The joint pieces of the different papers become one piece of drawing, reflect different sides of landscape. When I work on these specific drawings, I was not satisfied with the amount of works and the papers I was using to draw. I scared about buying new papers from Colombo because we were unable to travel to places, even to the next lane or the next village in those lockdown days. I tried to find out new material to create new set of works, and we were connected. And I felt that on those days we were connected in the virtual space here to create some animations. And and share them on Instagram. And the effort I took became very interesting to me. And I really like the way I work on it, and I did more works. So because of that, I got many chances to display the works in some kind of art initiatives in social media spaces. And also, so I also collaborated, like exhibit in some platforms, which they collaborate artists with who work with these kind of digital mediums. So you can see here like how this works. Examples of those places, like the screens of the screenshots of the social media pages, and here you can see like like all these kind of social media pages. And also sometimes I hope that you can get the links through the chats. And this is for an example. I can say that this is the workshops I did with the museum. I did with the kids as a kind of coloring workshop. So the people and young curators from the museum, they collaborate with me and the kids, and we did it. So I think that in this way, I can say that I was attending and engaging with so many Zoom meetings and virtual talks and exhibition. Here we need to depend on data to be in touch, and the weather and the condition of the area network decide the quality of data. So if we have, it's all about the weather and, the internet and the electricity. So we had to depend on those kind of things when we connect through this kind of virtual space. So here I really like to say that a practicing artist depend the sites where the works are created, exhibited, and published. The sites of production decides the works from these issues of residence, studio space, materials, size, transport, content, data, and so on. The fact is, each depends the other and the other. Thank you.
Thanks, Jasmine. It's also like, it's funny, like I think you moved to Jaffna, you scheduled your travel to Jaffna from Babunia just so that you can make it to the panel in Jaffna because the internet connectivity is better there.
Yeah.
And just wanted to put that in. Yeah. We can go move on to Natasha now.
Sure, thank you. Just let me know if my screen is or my audio is working fine. Somehow, due to Murphy's Law, the internet decided to not work well today, and I hope that it goes smoothly. Thank you so much for inviting me, India Art Fair, Ishara Foundation, Sabi, everyone, the panelists. It's been a pleasure to have conversations and share our practices and to come together today and talk about our work. It's really a privilege, so thank you so much. I will start by asking a question. What truly happens when we connect? Is it possible to touch the human aura, experience human energies, the immaterial, ephemeral? Can we ever find true connection with ourselves, with others, and with the environment? I'm interested in working with the human body where I create performance situations. Beyond the immediate experience of body as spectacle making or image making, I'm interested in the internal, the spiritual, the transcendental, that lends towards creating moments of intuitive connectivity and viscerality, to experience being and creating at the same time. While showing my early work in Pakistan, I realized the traditional exhibitory sites were very restrictive. Performing inside a white cube took away the viscerality of the human experience. It felt contrived and it felt forced. Furthermore, I wasn't charmed with the insular exclusivity of the art community. It's necessary to reach out to craftsmen, to creatives from other disciplines, architects, poets, writers, and to create a collaborative environment. Also, the fact that there is no infrastructure for performative works in Pakistan. A dearth of spaces, curators, academic support, funding, and even an audience. It's this lack of infrastructure that pulled me towards curating. My first attempts toward questioning this framework was a show I curated at the Pakistan National Council of the Arts in Islamabad, titled We Are All Mad Here, in 2015. As a Fulbright alumni, I won a grant from Pakistan US National Alumni Network, which was a source of funding for this project. This show was a way to engage government sites, approaching interdisciplinary creatives, engaging academic institutions, and creating a space for performative works. Still, I felt our bodies exist in isolation, restrictions, compartments. We don't truly interact with our environment. And when we do, it is generally transactional in nature. We live within inhibitions. These inhibitions can be based on class, gender, politics, or the fear of censorship. With an intention to question this framework further, I established a platform in Pakistan titled House in 2017. The objective of this platform is to move outside these boundaries, seeking for the city, the streets, the parks as a site for experiencing and understanding the body and for making art. We approach the city as a performing organism because in order to truly understand the body, we need to take it outside any or all confines, literally and metaphorically. In my art practice as well as my curatorial work, I've been working towards trying to express these tensions between belonging and alienation. Through House LTD, I intended to re-navigate, resituate, and re-inhabit the city. I used open calls as a way to engage creatives and create an accessible community. And then the format of all House artist residencies was simple. We would start by walking in the city a little more mindfully. We would study the people, how they behaved alone or in groups, their clothes, storefronts, how people used and reused everyday objects, how they connected and interacted with each other. We would go into the city and use humor and play as a way to interact with people on the streets, street vendors, passerbys, children, and shopkeepers. This photo is from one of the workshops where we use gestures and mimicking as a way to interact with few vendors on the streets. A very friendly and unoffensive way to break inhibitions and find comfort on the streets and with the people. At the end of the workshops, the artists channeled these experiences and performed on these same sites. These workshops led towards fascinating moments of true internal awakenings where artists started to delve deep into their personal lives and created intimate performances in front of an unrehearsed audience. This is not about the business of art, not about the exhibition, not about archiving. It is about being, feeling, and connecting. It is somehow as if performance elevated, empowered the artists. Another show I curated under House in Lahore was titled We've Been Waiting for You in 2019, a show designated to bringing performative works back into some sort of a structure. It began with probing the restrictions of current exhibitory sites to rethink the curatorial structure and to create an accessible, non-hierarchical space for the artist and the audience, which functions beyond the current standards of art making and exhibiting. We need to know the rules to break the rules. With Justice Project Pakistan as a key collaborator and generous funder of the exhibition, we worked together to refurbish an abandoned film studio set, the Bari Studios in Lahore, into an exhibitory site. So it takes art outside of the controlled, limiting gallery site and into an accessible public space where the local community and audiences from all walks of life were able to witness the live works. I was also sensitive towards making sure to keep a budget aside for production as well as an artist honorarium. Furthermore, with funding, there was now the provision to play with scale and the opportunity to question scale and how scale of a work completely changes the experience of a performance. My role as a curator and artist are not mutually exclusive. As a curator, I'm interested in questioning the institutional framework around art making and exhibiting. As an artist, I'm interested in transcendence through ritual and performance, but also questioning the limitations of performance art. The fact that a performance cannot be sold, transported, or re experienced. It is temporal, it's a moment in time and space, and once it is over, it cannot be re experienced. It becomes a fragment of the memory. My most recent work, this performance film titled My Soul Washed After the Water of Seven Seas Still Remain Muddy, which I created at Wasal Art Karachi in 2019, explores duration, city as a site, and modes of documenting of a performative work. I question, how can we document or archive a performance? How does the work live after it is over? Can we re-experience the work after it's done? A way could be to preserve the residues of a performance as artifacts or archival material, and we can document the performance in a way that allows, but can we document the performance in a way that allows one to share the moment in time and preserve its sanctity intact? This performance aims to explore the dual relationship between the human body and nature. As the performance happens live in front of an unrehearsed audience, multiple drone cameras capture it without any cuts or pauses. Where the performance explores ritual, intimacy, rawness, the cameras preserve the rawness immediately. So in a way, the cameras become part of the work. The performers and drones perform together. Contrary to a live experience, in a performance film, you get to view the performance from angles you would possibly not if watching it live. The expanse of a drone video camera allows to capture intimate moments, as well as the vastness of the human horizon, beyond the human eye. It brings into the work the movement, the mood, as well as the vastness of the site. In the end, I would just like to highlight and open the room for conversation towards South Asian performance art, and how, as an artist, curator, and writer, I feel there is a lack of academic and critical conversations to rethink the current infrastructures in galleries as well as the art market. Thank you so much for being a patient audience.
Thanks, Natasha. Mohit, would you like to take it on?
I directly jump on our context of site and infrastructure and share my ideas about it. So I begin to think about a body as a site. I will read out some of the paragraph and later on show some slides. In my experience, the body becomes a place where several events are continuously activated. It's one of the busiest sites. That's why the body is always tired or at work. It's a location of appearance, symptom, and continuous making and unmaking of self. The body in this way is an embodiment of the ideology, layer or mixed layer by multiple infrastructure. The body becomes nothing but a site where infrastructure aim to organize the body in all possible ways. To measure these layers of ideology, I think in a way body as a scale or tool or machine, measuring the event, situation, and condition that infrastructure produce on the body, and the body plays or dwells with it. My screen is visible?
Yeah.
Okay. The body as a whole is a corporate of multiple organs. This idea of whole as a society together makes a harmonized body, create a minor within it. When an organ stops working or refuses to do what it meant to do, the whole body stops functioning. The body changes. The minor response to society appears as a resistance and can stop the city from its functioning. This organ voice is practice of disagreement. On other hand, infrastructure is all about submission and agreement. In my thinking, the minor is not only speaking, but creating a protest as a new infrastructure, as a retroactive effect of power infrastructure, not remaining into the resistance, but making an open space for dialogue, care, and improvisation. In this way, minor is the only part that can advance or improvise or accelerate the contemporary infrastructure. Okay. Thinking about organs and minor, pig is something which is I'm looking at, and The pig is a suitable animal source for experimentation of bioengineering to practice to produce a future industry of human organ and its development. Without a doubt, the pig is a very much ideological entity that shows the impurity in India. The drawing are situating the pigs in the city and what part of the city they surround and its politics. And also thinking about how kind of open sewer system where this particular pig sustain their life becomes a kind of really interesting space. And also thinking about the waste infrastructure where this animal kind of sustain on it. At the same time become a very important animal for the human development of organ. And this particular within the urban development, how sewer infrastructure kind of take a modern take on caste, also patronizing with this kind of programs of Swachh Bharat, but without the annihilation of caste. Okay, so this is the images coming from the which Kaushal yesterday showed that particular image of hand, which is this one. So this is this images which I'm showing. This is the part of the work, part of the same project. Thinking through waste and remains of the body that become a documentation of the event, identity, and individual. These images. So thinking about these images as a form of documentation coming from the idea of residue and traces. So you always touch something, you left certain kind of trace there. What is the documentation itself is a larger question that joins with these terms: information, memory, data, traces, residue, evidence, archive, and so on. We desperately need our documentation to prove ourselves that I exist. This is the fundamental law of any infrastructure network cannot work without documentation. It's a basic structure. It is to record the time and remain live. When we come to record, the capture, observing, recording to the image become a self-surveillance or mode of representation. Now the camera is not only the tool that sculpts the body into information, but different truth-making productions such as forensic laboratories or archaeology that is based on the looking into the residue or the traces of the event. Now thinking about traces and residues, I'm interested in these kind of sites where abandoned site dust or the dumping ground become a kind of my interest to open up. And this is the one of the site where me and one of my friend Murli Chandora, we kind of simply collaborated into different floors of the one building. And I just engaged with this underground site where the dust was occupied. So this is a ball basically coming from the collection of the dust on my body, and just I simply squeeze this dust into this tiny ball. This is a line which happened after breathing closer to the ground, inhaling the dust and exhaling the clean. Again, thinking about very particular organ of the body. Then I sort of draw some of the public and think about how to invite in particular site, just simply putting on the poster online on internet and just having a draw a certain kind of dialogue. This is a project called Kadr, where I simply having this food called kag as a bread, and which has this wrapping papers on it, which again has a certain kind of traces, oil traces. This is a stall where the bread seller sells the bread, and I simply started investigating or looking at the different investigation of looking at these traces while exploring the neighborhood of the bread seller. So this is a thread which kind of measure the dug land of the construction site, where the most of the food was consumed by the construction worker, and this energy goes back to the construction site, which is a billionaire project, residential project. So this thread as a measurement of that depth comes back to my hand rest and create a certain kind of senseless, again, this soil coming from that deep depth ground of the foundation, construction foundation, which has a certain kind of moisture in it. Now the gesture becomes for me just holding this kind of soil until the heat of my body exchange the moisture of the soil and produce this kind of shape out of it. Again, interested with this kind of traces and looking back to this archaeological case, but from the perspective of waste and residue. Then I kind of utilize this residues and rethink about the space and move this whole site into the institutional site, where I particularly display this kind of residues on this cavity, and also thinking about how to reconstruct the site into the institutional site and just kind of communicate with already public which institutional has established. Yeah. We'll stop now here.
Thanks, Mohit. Thanks all of you. I think kind of gave a pretty quick, brief, but quite a concise sense of your practices. And I feel like I've seen these images so many times through the many meetings that we've had, that I might end up like referring to certain things that you've said before, but I feel like the way that you've kind of placed your inquiries are really help make those connections. I mean, it's interesting while I was listening to all of you, like Mohit, you spoke about like this moving, like like working with the construction site, working at the site with the traces, and how you kind of move through these sites that are outside the institutional site where your studio is, right? You were in Ashkal Alwan, I think, in Beirut when you did this work, and then you're kind of exhibiting it in these cavities, in those underground spaces under the mezzanine. And this was something that I'm curious about. I mean, of course, at the level of how audience, I mean, the audience or the public that kind of comes to see this work, it happened on the open day, right? And the institutional site itself has certain conditions that produce certain limitations. Like, I'm also thinking about when Maksud was showing his work, and how, you're talking about contamination, Maksud, where these spores from the fungal soup from the fungal environment are kind of there's a certain symbiosis that you're talking about, and how you kind of produce or recreate these environments where these microorganisms can go wild, and in a way you're kind of juxtaposing it with this table of like these scientific apparatuses that and they're there, and you say that they're part of your research. But what I found interesting was that, you earlier when we were speaking, you had mentioned how you don't place the names of the species under each of the samples, right? And there is a certain omission of this kind of inferential drive that happens in science through scientific methods, to identify, to extract, and like kind of categorize certain labels or certain create a taxonomy essentially. and you're kind of disrupting this very the kind of this very optimized space of the scientific lab by placing it in this room which is full of microorganisms already. And I find it interesting how then, the works that you showed, I think the first couple of slides that you showed were in Max Muller Bhavan as part of 5 million incidents in Delhi, right? And the other one that you had shown was, I think, as part of the Kochi Biennale. And both of these, even though the Kochi Biennale, you mentioned that the room was abandoned and, it didn't really, it wasn't a pristine space in itself, but it was still a venue that people who have come to see the Kochi Biennale are going to. And there are these implicit, explicit sort of, conditions or certain kind of organizational protocols. You might need to like that the institutional sites where you're exhibiting your works. They have, they might be, you might have to buy a ticket to enter that space. You might have to, there is a gate, it's a gated entry. You might have passes. If you don't have a pass, you can't enter. And I was wondering how you read this kind of, on the one hand, this isolated contamination in this space, which is actually also, which is situated within the site of an artist, of an art institution that's giving you that space, but which also has certain protocols and ways of organizing that affect. And I was wondering how they affect, your the way that you engage, or how do you deal with that? It's even in terms of the conversations that you have while eating, while drinking mushroom soup. This was something that I kind of just wanted to open up, taking both Mohit's and Maksud's kind of point about exhibiting in these institutional sites. And Natasha and Jasmine, both of you spoke. Documentation is something that all of us have been talking about for a while. Mohit, it was interesting that you spoke of documentation as this kind of evidence or a way to kind of. It's not just a trace. It's a trace which has a certain a purpose, right? That kind of pushes the certain ways in which we inscribe a presence. And I was just kind of relating this to both, and of course, like Natasha, when you spoke about like rehearsed and unrehearsed kind of situations, and in both these senses, I'm curious, like how does documentation in a way become, when we apply for grants or when we're writing a bio, when we are making a proposal, right? There are certain formats that we often have to subscribe to, right? And PDF chahiye, like we need a PDF. We want only links, or only up to 10 works, only 25 MB, and is something that all of us share irrespective of wherever we are. Like, it's also curious because, I'll get to that later, but I wanted to kind of lay that out in terms of how then do these kind of technical, very, what we would call logistical processes that are actually a very technical, it's a technical activity. And how do you read documentation on this kind of ways in which we rehearse and or not rehearse our ways of articulating practices, and how does that weave into the way that we like that in the way that one's artistic practice gets evaluated and even distributed. And in the what kind of expectations do these how do you respond to these expectations, and are they something you kind of veer around? Is it something that you kind of conform to? Is it something that you kind of work with, but you kind of do it in a different way? Just to kind of open maybe these two nodes, and we can kind of just can kind of set the ball rolling that way.
Okay, so I think for me, specifically thinking about, in particular, Ashkal, what sort of facility it produced in terms of inviting on the open days. My experience was pretty open, though. The space and the people there was like really ready to experiment in terms of installing something. So that was a good experience over there. But I think apart from them, sometimes institution, and specifically these kind of spaces, allow you to connect with larger spaces, create larger network, just to kind of share your work into different space, different practitioners. So that is a good part, I think. But also, same time when I was like doing this kind of self initiative, we posted the poster on net. You invite like 100, you put 100 email, but there is a less amount of audience which you can draw. I think it takes a time also to establish something. But yeah, I think self initiative, I think where I'm standing right now, it's kind of very first step or thinking about it, not exactly. So far, I don't think so. I feel that kind of restriction in terms of installing somewhere, because I would do also not have a kind of display practice that much. It's more like a performative, and sometimes I just did some of the projects. So it's mostly like books, opening up in the public spaces, recording it, doing the stuff on public spaces again. So in that term, in terms of practice, I find it interesting to just experiment and open up the spaces. Yeah, I think which needs to lead Natasha's practice. I think that she leads a lot of public spaces in her work.
Thanks, Mohit. Yeah, I was thinking about this, and I think documentation is a primary concern in my work, or the performative practices that primarily draw me, and performative works that draw me. And one of the very basic question that we always come back to is that a documentation of a performance, once a performance is over, you see the documentation, right? And that is sort of a byproduct of the actual work. And so there's always a sense of a reduced or like a subsidiary, or like a lesser of the actual work, which in a way is restrictive in terms of taking the work beyond where you initiated it. Because you see, the thing is that currently in the art world, we have multiple networks and multiple modes of coming together. We have the format of residencies, which is a much more intimate space where you go, where you have the freedom of engaging with the community and with the institution. You get the space where you can experiment and exhibit your work in the most, in the way that you initiated it or intended it to. But then when you bring it to a gallery space where we normally conform and we think of this is where, eventually this is where the work should appear, or this is the primary home of an artwork, it becomes a very different conversation. Because first of all, there are no tools to ever document an experience, right? You cannot talk about the feeling that it sort of provoked, the temperature of the room, any other, like in Maksud's case, the mushroom soup, the taste of the soup, or in my earlier works where I was using sensory, engaging the senses of the body, you cannot talk about that. It is a very in the moment sort of an experience. So that basically what that does is that the current infrastructure that we have does not work for a performative work. How do you do that? And a lot of times for me, I've tried to find solutions and fit my work in the sort of infrastructures that are currently existing to have a seat at the table, to represent the work, because there is the pressure of packaging yourself and packaging the art in a way that here it is, the 25 MB or the 10 images or the 5-minute long video, and that becomes very restricting. So it's all about, I think for me, is about understanding that I think now we're in a place where we have created, or there are artists that are moving outside of this sort of framework. But somehow, I guess in South Asia, there is this idea of bringing it to the gallery, or it having some sort of a commodity, or this capitalist standard that you can fit the work in, and then often it cannot. So I feel like these conversations are much needed, and I think we need to open it up and talk more about what to do now, like how to represent, how to show your work as you intend.
Yeah, so for me, it's like, as you say, as like Aasma said, that she mentioned about applying the grants and some kind of, publications and all these kind of stuffs. Personally, that when we, in terms of records, in terms of archiving, or in terms of making history, we need those kind of documentations. And, we need some kind of archival things for documents for these kind of things. But at the same time, when I applying art initiatives or some kind of grants, I feel that my works, because of the size of my works and the way my works, it's in a horizontal way. So according to that, I feel that my works, I have some kind of doubts, is that my work give the actual feeling of when you see the works in physically. So when people just see the images like through the digital mediums, it's became a kind of misunderstanding. So it's became a kind of issue with like reaching the actual feeling of the texture and actual feeling of the lines and those kind of things. So I think, and also when I speak some with my friends, sometimes mostly the installation artists and some kind of performing artists, they always mention that kind of things, like when we physically, when we do the performance in front of the public space, we can, we can just reach the people with the actual concept. And as Aasma said, we can just, when you, some people use the kind of smell kind of things, we can just experience that. But when we only think about the documentation, that's not reached in that much level. That's what I really say, like to say. And also we can see in that these kind of things in Maksud works also.
This is very interesting conversation. I think that the documentation, I think it's very, in the diverse that we looking at, the documentation, sometimes it's not possible to document certain things, as like my practice in the sense of like when the smell is, important to, in the discourse, or also about that, how you can taste the mushroom soup. So this is also very interesting for me to, like when I'm documenting something, so it's becoming like a part of or certain, incident that I am looking at, like how microscopic detail I'm, capturing. So this is, I think, very interesting for me, as like this is like a observer I'm looking at. So something like I'm missing also in my practice, when I'm doing a work. So there are the size or the format of the work that I'm missing something in there. Like when I'm talking about non-human entities. So this is like a very, it creates challenge for me to like what to document, or, to how to bring this in the conversation, and what I'm bringing to show you, like there are so many things that even I could not see, so this is I think it's very challenging for us to do in a certain level, to how to document and how to share it. Yeah, of course we can't see the whole whole artwork, in the sense like as I explained, like like how non-human entities are there in the even in the beyond the human visibility. So I think, yeah, in that sense, like also how Mohit was explaining about the sensation of the temperature of the hand and it's transforming, so how to share that in the documentation. So I think in this format, it's changing, like, or also it's a very, very thought provocative, like how we can think about the documentation in a, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, it's also, I mean, this is something that, that all of us, I think, have been documentation. And I think what Jasmine also pointed out earlier, which is to do with publishing, like, whether it is documentation that's being shared, and in what formats is it being shared. So you, on the one hand, like publishing through an organization, like a publishing organization, is one thing, but it's something that I've been thinking about, and been thinking through what it even means to we're always all like, with the past couple of years, it's really, especially with the pandemic, everything has become online. Whatever's printed is also, there's always like an analog of it on online, but it also makes me think about like the internet and the kind of infrastructure that the internet itself kind of carries, and what is it that what we have access to. Like, it's like what you were saying, Jasmine, about data, right? Right? It's something that's not in your control, and something that I've been working on with Kaushal, who was moderating yesterday's panel. We've been working on like a self-hosted server, a server that's at home, here right next to me. I'll share a few links, but it kind of became a way to, it was a technical exercise to kind of understand the scale of this internet infrastructure, and kind of making and then what does it mean to own, what does it mean to own the internet that's not on the web in a way, and what does it mean to have the server in a home where the electricity keeps going off. It's very precarious, it's very unstable, and so the exercise becomes about not only understanding this process, but also then what do these minor firms that Mohit also was talking about during his presentation, what kind of possibilities does that open up or generate in terms of the modes in which, or the structures in which we want to that we want to customize in terms of how we want to kind of produce and share content or share documentation of something that's happened. And that's something that, it was just something I wanted to share. I'll share links to the work. But yeah. Let me check if there are any questions. I think we are we're running out of time.
Really?
7. I think so. Sabi just texted on our group saying 10 minutes heads up at 7:14. I think we have another 5 minutes. But I feel like, the other thing that I was thinking about was, like, do you feel sometimes that, you're being, like, you take productivity for granted, because like I was in Ashkelon 1 in Beirut from 2019 to 2020, and I was thinking about. I mean, we as soon as we reached Beirut, within like 17 days there was there were huge uprisings, protests that took place in Beirut, and there was already an ongoing economic crisis that really got accelerated through the months that I was there, and our program hadn't even started, but it kind of suddenly all the expectations that one had to, okay, we've come for a residency and we're supposed to like do something now, kind of completely vanished, because there was absolutely no the resources and the attention, or the even like the urgency was not to be in the studio. The urgency became for everyone to be on the streets, and I think during that time, I think a lot of organizations are also kind of recalibrating their resources towards, like cultural organizations included, were recalibrating their resources towards mobilizing communities, supporting communities in that not just in terms of the people who are part of the art communities, but like people and communities, that the other kinds of communities that were part of at that moment in time. And I was wondering how, in that context, I kind of often would discuss this with my batchmates in terms of how, sometimes you feel like your productivity, you take it for granted, and you realize that whatever you're kind of responding to in that urgent moment is not always viable, and it's a certain template of the expectations that we take for granted. And I was wondering, even in the way that Jasmine is talking about, this kind of the security checkups that you were talking about last time, and how that it drives the content of your work. But I'm wondering how you position that in terms of the way that it gets circulated, and how is this kind of, how do you define productivity in that sense when you're working with these limitations?
Yeah, and also I really like to mention about that Mohit works, like there is a kind of similarities and differences between both of our works. Like Mohit is the one who don't care about the measurements and don't care about the frames of these kind of limited things. But for me, measurement is really needed, because most of my works I really had to send from Sri Lanka to other countries, like for example, to Delhi and other places. So every time when I create the works, I have to depend about what kind of size and what kind of size I have to give to the post office if I send by post, or if I give it the works to the shipment. I have to think about these kind of the procedures of sending the works. So I always have to think about the works, because I always have to think like the works have to be in a certain way, like the process is shipment have to be in a good way. Like I really scare about too much kind of checkings and too much kind of questions about the works and the contents and all. Not only me, most of my country, like most of my friends in Colombo and the other places, we always think about the materials and the content, what we works. If not, we have to, sometimes it's take delay to reach the place where we really need to exhibit the works. And sometimes it takes, we have to spend more money with those kind of expenses, delays and all these kind of things. I think that in that way, we always, as an artist, we always think to produce works without limitations and without barriers and this and that. But sometimes when we go this kind of process, that will always, we have to depend some kind of limitations, some kind of, struggles and all these kind of things. That's what I really like to say in this time.
Would anyone else like to add?
I'll just add a brief response also, since I know we're almost done with the time for the panel. I think for me, that was definitely the restrictions of the creative, the isolating studio. Once I sort of rejected that and I wanted to go out into the city, it completely changed the way that I approach the city, and also the way that I approach these places, parks that I would go to on everyday basis, and where we would go and want to conduct a workshop, and realize that we could not really access them in terms of like getting permissions and, you know, having those papers and all of those sort of the government structures that are in place, and when you are actually wanting to go and access any public space in a sort of a safe way, not trying to dismantle anything over there. And also in terms of security and the fear of performing in front of the crowd, the public, how we navigated those sort of limitations and also challenges, where we all sort of had the solidarity of knowing what we were going into, but then also mindful towards what are the things that we can do living in Pakistan. We cannot do a nude performance in Pakistan. We cannot talk about certain things in Pakistan. There's a lot of censorship that sort of comes with this sort of trying to create a creative space. And so I think those completely changed the way that I approached art making, and also like my own body and the politics of the body. And I think that informed a lot of the decisions that I made as a curator for the artists that I was working with, and then also in my own practice as an artist.
Okay. Mohit, were you going to say something?
Yeah, I was thinking about productivity and quickly adding on one point. I mean, I find it certain kind of trap. It's just a kind of loop where one have to kind of continuously produce something or become active. The other part would be just, again, this kind of, you mentioned about Beirut protest, no? So suddenly everything was stopped. And I think that's something which produced something which is interesting. And for that, some sort of like so that event was stopped, home forum was stopped, or many practices, like regular practices was stopped, and certain kind of new change take place. So that is something I like to think as something is really producing. And the idea of, I mean, not thinking about documentation, but kind of methodology of documentation. We always have a very specific nature to document something. So I do think different ways of documenting. This is simple example of taking photograph of drawing or any work like with this angle, but not having a very certain kind of different modes of looking at it. So that is, I think, I would like to. I mean, I try to explore.
Cool. I think we are kind of quite past our time. Maybe we can wrap up. But just to kind of briefly just end with like we're just remembering yesterday's closing remarks, and how it was mentioned that I think Sabi was saying that the way that artists are kind of like how people are defining themselves as artists is not through the expectations of art institutions, and are defining it in their own ways. But I also feel like, and that's something we're all discussing, which is that it's also a call to, it's not just about defining ourselves as artists in our own way, but also what we expect from art institutions and infrastructures. I think that's something that all of us and as a group kind of really felt strongly about, and that's how we wanted to also open these questions up. Okay, with that, thank you.